Well, hello and welcome back to Drucker Forum TV. And our next guest is usually a popular speaker and star in Vienna every year. But unfortunately, this year diaries will not allow Lynda Gratton, professor at London Business School, to be with us in person. However, the next best thing, she's got some time to speak to us today. So, Lynda, welcome to Drucker Forum TV.
Thank you, and I'm so glad. I'm so sad I'm not in Vienna. I'm in Tokyo right now.
But that's global business for you. Lynda, this year's Drucker Forum has the theme of creative resilience. I mean, emphasis on
Mhm.
resilience as well as creative. I recently read a terrific piece by you in the Times where you were making the point that, in a way, in order to be resilient, you've got to recognise what sort of challenge you're actually facing, and you drew a distinction between two different types of challenges that professionals might be facing. I gather in your new book you're actually exploring further types of challenges, but perhaps you could start off by talking about these different sorts of challenges we need to
Yeah.
recognise in order to display that resilience.
Well, thank you, Stefan, and lovely to see you, by the way. Um, well, I'm writing, I'm old enough now. When you get to my age, everybody writes about their life, doesn't it? As my publisher says, Linda, nobody wants to listen to you writing about your life. But anyway, I think I've made it a bit more interesting. And one of the things I've looked at is the challenges that I faced. And when I looked at
Mm,
them, Stefan, I realized that they weren't all the same. They came in
mm,
different categories. And let me just tell you the three categories, because they do have, as a consequence, rather different ways of dealing with them. So the three that I've got are, first of all, life stage challenges, secondly, era
mhm,
challenges, and third, challenges of loss. Let me just say a bit about each of them. Life stage challenge. You've just had a baby, you're at home, you're exhausted, you think, oh my God, how am I ever going to do this? You become 60 and think, hang on, what am I going to do next? All of those things. And the point in here, Stefan, is you're not the first or only person that's faced that challenge.
right.
I wrote these stories about my life, and one of them was being absolutely exhausted with my eldest son, Christian, who was a baby. I was trying to write. He was exhausted. I was exhausted. We just ended up sitting there crying for hours and hours on end.
Mm,
So, how do you face life stage challenges? Well, I think you do
mm,
so by reaching out to others who are in the same life
mm,
stage, facing the same challenge, and just sort of find out how are they dealing with it. It's really a process of empathy, but also
mm.
realizing that when your mum says, "Oh, Linda, it's like this," remember that she's not the same as you. And in my case, my mum wasn't
Interesting.
working, I was. So
Mm,
that's the first. Second is what I'm calling era challenges. And oh my goodness, Stefan, haven't we had some of those big ones recently? First, the two that I'm speaking of particularly, or thinking of particularly, is the pandemic and now generative AI, which are
mm,
things that are sort of unexpected, but probably not, which affect everybody together. Nobody managed to escape the pandemic. Nobody managed to escape a generative AI. And there and often I thought these are things that you don't really know how to deal with it. I mean, I don't know if you
mm.
remember, Stefan, but I kept diaries of
Oh,
the
yes.
pandemic. They are my 30 pandemics, probably more, 30 pandemic diaries. And I wrote a book,
Mm,
as you know, and a couple of HBR articles about it. So I think that's much more about experimenting. It's about trying to learn. It's about observing. It's about taking lots, little risks. And the third, which is the challenge of loss, is just, you don't get promoted. Your mum's dying. Things. And when I
mm,
looked at these, they were always about loss. They were always about something you
mm,
thought you would have and you haven't got any more. And so for me, the solution in a way for that was about resilience and friendship. How do you deal with your parents dying?
mm,
Well, you have friends around you, you're resilient. So that's where I think resilience really comes in. And just to finish on that, we need to have a
mm.
good working life to be resilient. I mean, if you're completely exhausted, and in your 50s or 60s when your parents die, you don't have anything to give them. So three types of challenge, Stefan: life stage,
Mm.
era, and loss. The final
And
chapter of
what
my
they
new
seem
book.
That's perfect. Well, we're looking forward to reading it. But one thing that's perhaps common to those three is that, and you mentioned in the outset, this business of opening up, of being accessible to advice, to support. I think you've
Yeah.
written about this in the past that managers sometimes and I won't say it's only men who do this, but it may be often men who do this, that they hunker down, that we
Yeah.
adopt the defensive crouch, and we're nervous to admit that we might need help. And there's so
Mm.
something about resilience requires that honesty, and even you
Mm.
might say vulnerability, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and when I was thinking about these, Stefan, one of the things that I was wondering about is, um, how do you face up to this stuff? And in fact, I have examples for myself of each one of these things.
Mm,
And you're right. I mean, it is a feeling of vulnerability. You can't get over the fact you've just had a child who's not sleeping and you're
mm,
exhausted. You can't get over the fact that it's a pandemic and everybody's locked down. You can't get over the fact that your best friend dies. And I think that understanding that and realizing that, one of the things I've been doing for years, and that, Stefan, you're very aware of,
mm,
is I've tried to help us understand that work doesn't happen in isolation. Work is part of your whole life. And these
mm,
are all life experiences, but they're often focused on work. Um, and so being vulnerable and opening yourself up, and also friendship. I've written a lot, as you
mm.
know, recently about friendship, but that comes when I think about a good working life. I just so often think about friendships and the capacity to pick up the phone to someone and say, I'm really
Yes,
hurting. But you have to have
yes.
friends to be able to do that.
Yes. Is that something that you found with all your work with the your hotspots movement? I know you do a lot of work with big companies around the world. Is that something that genuine hotspots, which is a positive thing, have in common, that there is a network of friendships? There's a culture of openness and cooperation.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, yes. Well, it is very important, and I think it's interesting. Every year there's a sort of a new beat, isn't there? And I try, as we all do,
Mm,
to sort of keep up with that new beat. And what I'm noticing people talking about a lot is culture. Which I think they're
mm,
all going back to culture, and a culture of openness, a culture of
mm,
connectivity, a culture of
mm,
collaboration. How do you
mm,
build that? And of course, I
mm,
think that's people are particularly worried about that because hybrid work means that you can get quite isolated when you come into work. The
mm.
people you really like aren't there. So these are
Yes.
questions that have really come up to the surface when where previously we didn't really worry so much because we always knew
Mm,
if you have a friend at work, you're more likely to stay there. We know that from the Gallup data. I've got my best friend at work used to be anyway the number one predictor of whether you stayed or not. But
mm,
that's becoming more complex, and that means in a way that we just have to be more thoughtful about it, and we have to design it. And I guess if there's one thing I'm learning in the last few years is it's this issue that you have to design for stuff. You can't just hope that everything's going to happen. You can't hope, that you can meet these challenges. You have to design for them. And if your resilience,
mm,
as I said to you this morning, my resilience is
mm.
terrible because I had one of my teeth out last night. So although I put all my makeup on, I am actually inside exhausted. And that's fine for a day. But if I did that for a week, I'd really be exhausting myself. So, because these challenges come in ways that you don't anticipate, if you don't have some
Mm,
sort of basis of resilience, and I don't know if you
mm,
remember in the 100 Year Life, Andrew Scott and I have this,
mm,
even a survey take for free, which looks at your resilience around issues of am I learning? Do I have friends? Am I building my reputation? And it's like a bank account, you can go into the red occasionally, but if you go into the red for too long, then when these
mm.
challenges come along, you don't have the capacity to deal with them.
This sounds like a much more interesting and I dare say healthier version of resilience than the sort of pre-pandemic world where there was a kind of slight macho tinge to resilience, it seems to me, and that bosses might have been urging resilience on their organization, and what that kind of meant was, this is going to be tough, and you've just got to take it, you've got to suck it up. That's what resilience meant. But what you're describing
Yeah.
seems much more sophisticated, much more human, and healthier for the long term.
Well, I think so. And I think it's interesting. I'm at the age now where I am beginning to survey, all these books I've written and all the people I've trained and the life I've had. And I think that, a good working life does, you have to design it. It's not just going to emerge. And you have
Mm,
to ask questions. You have to be reflective. You have to make observations. And you have to realize that yeah, if you exhaust yourself psychologically, emotionally, physically, you're not going to be able to deal with these. And I think both you and I, Stefan, over the years have written quite a lot about these new issues. And of course, every time we think, okay, that's it, we've talked about the pandemic. I don't need to keep any
Mm.
more diaries. I don't need to write a book, another book. And then Chat GPT, I can promise you, I'm not going to write a book about Chat GPT, but I am writing a lot about it. Um, and then something else is going to come, and we don't even know what that is. I have some ideas, but
Mm.
I don't know what they are. So you just always have to be energized, don't you, and observant and curious, and that doesn't happen if you're exhausted.
And the organization of work, as you say, I mean, it sounds like a traditional, very, a decades old discussion, but in a world of hybrid. And that's a very nice point you make about why go in if the people you want to see aren't actually there. Or equally, if you're a younger worker, why go in if they're not letting you meet mentors, if they're not organizing the work system so that you can actually learn from people? These become
Yeah.
really practical questions.
They do. And that's why quite a lot of the writing I've done recently, I use the word intentional. You have to
Mm.
be intentional about the way you design work. It was fine when everyone just came into the office in the morning and stayed there all day and went home at night, and they're mostly the same. You didn't have to be intentional about anything. But now they're coming in at different times. They're very different people. They're doing different things. I mean, I'm
Mm.
fortunate enough in many ways to be both a professor and the founder of a consulting practice, which moved from hotspots to now being called HSM. But that happens. So just to make it a bit easier on the
Thank you.
and so I actually can experience it. I can experience what it's like running a company where half the people are on sabbaticals or hybrid or I don't know, whatever. It's difficult.
Mm.
And so, this intentional design of work is really, really crucial.
Mm. And Drucker told us, didn't he, that management is a practice. It is a liberal art. It's about doing, not just thinking. And so once again, there's some inspiration to be found in the old man's writings. He covered most of this at one point or another.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree, actually. And I think that some of the people who carried on his work, like Charles Handy and Warren Bennis, and I think me to a certain extent, have really tried to keep that going. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you remember, Stefan, Diane and Gersten and I wrote a book about managers for Harvard
Mm.
Business Review, not a book, sorry, an article. And that really said, God, they are so important. If you think they're the frozen middle, you're not getting it. They are actually the golden
Mm.
thread. I'm
Mm.
proud to
Mm.
say
Mm.
that got the
Yeah,
Warren Best Award. Best article
you're
of the
quite
year.
right.
Here you go.
Quite right.
So the direct
We'll look.
look,
We'll
Drucker
a thread. We'll look
thread.
forward to the next article and the next book and what else you have to teach us about the eras that we're going through, the life stage challenges we're going through, and this question of loss, which I would love to talk to you about another time. I don't think we'll have
Yeah.
time today, but
No.
that's clearly, I mean, one of the things that people are experiencing first during lockdown and after it is the loss of a familiar, the former life that we were comfortable with, and that's
Mm,
another call for resilience to recognize that we're in a new moment and some of the old
yeah.
tricks won't work. We need a new outlook, perhaps.
And actually, in terms of loss, there are things that you'll never get back. Then that was one of the things
Mm,
that I was realizing when I thought about the losses that I've had in my life. These are things that you
mm.
can't return to, and really understanding how you can keep walking on is really important.
Well, we won't end on a downbeat. We'll end on a positive note. But Lynda, we're looking forward to the next book. We're looking
Great.
forward to challenges and being resilient by learning and listening to you as we have done for some time now, but we'll continue to do for a lot longer, I am sure. So thanks so much for
Thank you.
joining us here on Drucker TV today.
Thank you, Stefan. Lovely to be with you.